Hello, this is Anthony Parent of Parents and Parents, and I want to talk to you about the Paul Manafort, Richard Gates indictment that just came out from Robert Mueller. In particular, the part of the indictment that deals with FBAR violations of report of foreign bank accounts. This is a pretty interesting indictment, and I would say that over the years I've talked to a lot of people all across the country, around the world, who are U.S. persons who have an FBAR filing requirement. And I had a suspicion that a lot of people I talked to didn't take the action they needed to. And I have talked to many high-profile people. And so here is Paul Manafort. The indictment this is basically what it is. He has an affirmative duty, both he and Mr. Gates have an affirmative duty to file an FBAR if they control bank accounts over $10,000, if they're signatory or they have a financial interest in it. This comes from the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970. Now, this gets a little confusing because originally it was just the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network that was responsible for the filing of these. But there were so many filings that they sort of said, why doesn't the IRS take care of the audits? And there wasn't a lot of actionable intelligence. And really, you go back in time to the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, the whole reason why this was passed wasn't for tax compliance or tax evasion. There's already penalties for that. But really, what the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 was to do was to give sort of additional tools to law enforcement to go after people who are engaging in crimes, hiding money overseas, and making it quite easy to assess a penalty that could sort of bring down the entire organization. So it allows for a really high penalty if someone was doing it intentionally or willful, as we call it in our practice. So if you willfully fail to file an FBAR, the penalty, again, could be 50% of the account value on the date your FBAR was due, which used to be June 30th, but that's been changed. This year was due October 16th, which was the date the tax returns are due if they're on extension. There was an automatic extension for FBARs. I assume the same thing is going to be true in 2017. So here we have, it's an interesting indictment. So some of the things people, and I just want to go over some defenses that they may raise for not filing their FBARs. If they say, well, look, it's not my money. I was holding the money for other people. It wasn't mine. It doesn't matter. Because if you are in control of it for somebody else, you have an FBAR filing obligation. And even if it was something where they have some sort of beneficial interest in it, there's still an FBAR filing obligation. So I was sort of following this story, wondering how it was going to go down. So it's a significant, I think it's a significant wake-up call for people who thought that they were, for whatever reasons, they were going to be exempt from protection. Really, and you see the same patterns in this. It looks like that Special Counsel Mueller brought at least Mr. Gates' tax preparer to the grand jury, and that tax preparer showed, hey, I asked him about his foreign bank accounts, and he said, no, here's the email. And so that's where they're going to say, well, okay, they asked you about it, you specifically didn't file it, therefore it's willful. They also mentioned Schedule B. On Schedule B, there's a part of Part 3, Line 7, asked you, do you have any accounts overseas over $10,000? If so, you have a FBAR filing requirement. It looks like both of them check no. So that's where they're trying to say, okay, you're probably willful. Now, by the way, if that's you, that doesn't mean you're not automatically willful at all. The IRS says so. Even if you check no, because a lot of people see this, freak out, assume the worst case that, oh my God, I didn't file an FBAR, I better go into hiding because there's no hope for me. I'm going to face the same outcome as Gates and Manafort are, and I'll talk about that in a second. So people go into hiding, and you really don't need to do that. For a lot of people, even if you did do something intentional, as long as you beat the IRS to the punch or the Department of Justice, you can get away with something a little bit better than this. But here they are in just a really, really rough situation. I'm trying to think of potential defenses that they have. It's going to be hard. And one of the other things that makes it harder is that there's other crimes involved, alleged to have occurred. It's just not the non-filing an FBAR. which for a lot of our clients, that's really it. If you look at what they did, it's like, okay, maybe they didn't report some tax, but they don't really have a tax evasion charge, because in order to get a tax evasion charge, you need to have some sort of evidence of intent that somebody meant to evade taxes. Well, with international tax compliance, most people don't know that there's worldwide tax jurisdiction, so you didn't even know I was evading taxes. So it's kind of a hard one to prove, but with the FBAR, it's just like you didn't file it. It's so much easier to get that, right? You didn't file it. Here's someone specifically asking you for it, and here's you not doing it. So it's a little bit of an easier charge for the government to get. So again, the other charges he has involved, violations of various lobbying laws. I'm not an expert on those. Don't claim to be. It's just really the FBAR. But when there's other crimes involved, this is why I'm mentioning it. You're turning your exposure a little bit higher, because if it's just an FBAR, your top jail sentence, you're looking at 5 years for a willful penalty. We actually don't even run into those that much at all. We don't see a lot of willful penalties, criminal penalties. We see the IRS trying to assess willful civil penalties, but willful criminal penalties don't come up too much. But in this case, they are. Now, it's normally just 5 years if it's the FBAR and nothing else. But because there are these other crimes charged, your FBAR penalty now goes up to 10 years in prison, along with the civil fines. So it's just an incredible amount of leverage. And I think this is really what you want to look at, and sort of how you always look at an indictment. How you want to look at it is, what sort of leverage does the government have to compel a very lousy plea deal for Manafort and Gates, because that this springing liability from the non-filing an FBAR doubles the penalty. If they go to trial, it's really, really risky. I mean, they could be spending a long time in prison. So, I mean, if you're going through their minds right now, they might be, talking to their attorney, like, what am I really facing here? What are we going to bring? How are we going to? What's this going to cost? Right? You want to know what a trial is going to cost. I can tell you, just a tax evasion trial, your average tax evasion, if that's what we were just talking about, that's, $500,000 in legal fees with the trial, easy. Adding in complications, the defense for this, if you were going to be bringing up a defense, you're probably about $2 million for legal fees to fight this off, and that's a problem, right? Because your attorney wants that money. There might be money overseas, but it also might be frozen. Sometimes the government does that too. That the money you were planning on hiring an attorney with, you don't have access to, so that can make it a little sticky. And I'm just, and I would say this about this is, if people only knew how the law actually operated, they wouldn't do the things that they do. If Manafort and Gates filed an FBAR form, what would happen to them? If they did say, hey, okay, let's just say, look, I don't know the allegations, if they're true or not, right? With their allegations, it's an indictment. They're innocent until proven guilty. I don't know what they were up to, if they really were up to something illegally or not, but I can tell you this. If they filed an FBAR, just to say, hey, look, I'm up to something shady overseas, maybe not, I'm just going to file an FBAR to be sure. Well, that goes to the Bank Secrecy Act sort of clearinghouse. It just goes there. That information just sits there. And, I can't think of one criminal case or one tax audit that started based on an FBAR filing. That it's always it's been my opinion, it's been proven again and again, and maybe at some point there'll be some evidence to indicate otherwise, that if you think about where you file your FBARs, it's not the regular part of the IRS, where there's somebody who's scoring, hey, here's a red flag here, we're going to audit them here. Here's another red flag here, we're going to audit them here. No, it goes to a different part where the IRS actually doesn't quite see them. And I keep on asking every auditor, hey, have you initiated an audit based on an FBAR that was filed? The answer is always no. So if they filed an FBAR, the chances are there would not have been even an investigation filed. We'll file an FBAR for, a client has $50 million they're a signatory on. Nothing happens. You just file it. There's a lot of money in the world. Somebody's the signatory on it, right? If the government investigated every possible case, they couldn't get to anything, and most people aren't doing something criminal. So that's really the thing. You have to understand the FBAR, who's going to file an FBAR that's doing something illegal. And that's the reason why Financial Crimes Enforcement Network stopped administering it, because they're like, well, look, you're only getting people who are following the law filing FBAR, so we don't really care who files an FBAR. We'll only use it later on after we discover if maybe they did something wrong, and now we can assess them big penalties. So that's where I would have said, I would say, well, number one, I would always say to comply with the law. But number two, file an FBAR, because it's sort of a risk-free, you're just eliminating risk. You're not creating additional risk in whatever you're doing. That it just goes into, and if you remember at the end of the first Indiana Jones movie, this is what we've always likened it to. At the end of the first Indiana Jones movie, they bring the Ark of the Covenant to a big government warehouse. Here's the whole thing, the entire thing of what the movie was about, the MacGuffin of the movie, if you will, that everyone was fighting for. The Germans were fighting for it. India was fighting for it. Finally, the government gets it. What do they do with it? Right? Remember? They just stick it in the warehouse, and it's forgotten about. And that's kind of what FBARs are like. They're just stuck in a government warehouse where, I don't know, maybe somebody will look at them. Probably not, though. So that's where, I would say just file your FBARs. You're just, eliminate that risk by having it filed, because there's really not going to be that government agent looking for it. So we're looking at, Mr. Manafort and Mr. Gates are looking at 5 to 10 years just for the FBAR violations alone, or actually up to 10 years of exposure in FBAR alone. They're also looking at the civil penalties, right? And these are pretty crazy. Now, again, this was not a tax evasion tool. The FBAR was not a tax evasion tool. It was there to go after, punish, people a little bit more intense than someone who's evading taxes, someone who's international terrorists, drug traffickers, human traffickers. These are the kinds of people they were trying to get. International crime syndicates, people who were really good at evading, and also this is the other thing too. People, if you charged them with a crime, they would blow your car up, right? And so maybe you didn't really want to go after those people if you value your life. And that's the unfortunate aspect of it. So there's just thinking like, well, is there a way we could kind of just civilly go after them where it's sort of more of there's really no person attached to it, but we can kind of effectively put them out of business. And so with the FBAR penalties and the Bank Secrecy Act, if there's someone they suspect of doing things nefarious, they can sort of freeze the bank account, at least handicap their ability to engage their criminal enterprise. And that's really the purpose of it. So that's why we see this 50% FBAR penalty, and that penalty is calculated on the balance the FBAR was due. So for these, we're looking at, I think, FBARs up to 2014. So those FBARs were due June 30th of the following year. So whatever those balances were, that's what they're looking at. Now, typically the IRS, we deal with it. When they're going to assess an FBAR penalty, it's one. But in this case, there's really, you look at it, you don't see any guidance that says we are limited to that one. It's just their policy. But if they want to assess more than one willful FBAR penalty, they can. So, they just haven't been. Maybe this case they'd want to. So it actually could be something that there could be an FBAR penalty that vastly exceeds the amount of money ever in there, because there's usually about 6 year statute of limitations open to file willful FBAR penalties. Now, if you haven't filed an FBAR, I would just say, don't freak out too much. The key is to get disclosed before the IRS comes to you, before the government comes to you. Do that, and usually you can, you can at least walk away with no jail time. Then, as we get rid of jail time, now we're talking about where can we get your penalty down to? We want to get it as low as possible. And for some people, there is no penalty. For others, there can be a penalty attached. It really depends on the facts and circumstances. And I'm sure we have some tax professionals watching this. I'm going to put a link on Wednesday. Robert Hansen and I, along with Dennis Brager out in California, we're going to be doing a CLE on international penalties, including the FBAR. My section is really heavily on the FBAR penalties, the non-willful and the willful, how to develop facts, how to develop cases to give yourself the best negotiating position for reducing FBAR penalties whether you're inside a program or outside. Some of the things the IRS looks for, how to counter that, and really looking at some of the recent law. The recent law on FBAR penalties is actually pretty favorable, as we've seen. We've seen Pomerantz, Bedrosian. Those are two helpful cases where the IRS was looking for some massive penalties, but the taxpayers prevailed. So we've been seeing some good law here. And now I think here with this indictment, the IRS probably got a really big gift because, again, I know there's a lot of high-profile people out there who have been thinking that for some reason or whatever, I don't know what it is, they're feeling that they're exempt, they're not going to be touched, they have the protection in place that they're not going to be touched, and the government isn't looking to assess them willful FBAR penalties. So this is a fantastic gift. I think it's it's top news of the day, this indictment, big news, and it happens to be the IRS's sort of little-known dirty secret of their most popular penalty that they could assess because it really boosts up their stat. Boosts up their stat when someone is audited. The IRS has half the auditors it did 10 years ago, but they're under the pressure to get those press releases to say, hey, look how much money we're assessing. Look at this. Look at this. Well, the FBARs are great because your bang for your buck, as far as the IRS is concerned, is incredible. It's awesome because it doesn't take a significant amount of time to do an FBAR exam. When we're doing it, a couple days or so, depending on how many people are going to be interviewed, that's a lot easier than tracing back books, reconstructing books. It comes down to the state of mind. So, and unfortunately too, here's the other part, is that there's a lot of tax professionals out there, unfortunately, who don't know how to fight back well enough, I think, and sort of will roll over for the IRS when they really shouldn't. They actually have a strong case. They should fight back because they can lower their penalties. So that's why the IRS really, really likes this. I know we're getting a new commissioner next month, and this indictment is a fantastic gift because it's going to really, I think, jar the people that needed to be jarred loose. The people who came to us first, in this. We had some people who were just risk averse. They realized, okay, yeah, I definitely did the wrong thing over the years, intentionally so, and I've gotten away with it, so let me stop this. I'm going to enter into the program. That's 2009. And then 2011 and 2012, the people that we saw were really the people who made innocent mistakes. The bulk of people who have entered into some IRS program are all the people who have made some sort of innocent mistake, whether they're an H-1B visa holder from India who didn't know that their non-taxable account in India was actually taxable and reportable on FBAR, or maybe they didn't know their German, a German U.S. person who didn't know their German pension plan scheme was reportable on an FBAR, or they didn't know their foreign life insurance was reportable. The bulk, I would say 85% of our clients were all people who did something where it was kind of, where basically, why didn't you file? Well, because the IRS, the tax code's really tricky and the FBAR is really difficult to understand. But that's not to say over the years I haven't talked to a significant amount of people who absolutely knew what they were doing it intentionally. It's just that we found that those folks didn't quite want to go through the whole process to engage us. So it's going to be interesting to see if some of my old friends from the past decide to give a call to say, you know what, I've been thinking about coming clean now that Paul Manafort and Richard Gates have been indicted, and there's actually criminal charges pending for FBAR violations, and those criminal charges are 10 years. Maybe now I want to come clean. So we'll see about that. So I think that's all I have to say about this. I don't see any questions on this live one, but if you do a question, put in the comments. I will get back to them later. And then we'll see how this develops. And again, look for those links. I'm going to be uploading the links to the CLE that we're going to do on Wednesday, November 1st. And I think what I'll do is I'll also put a link into our FBAR most frequently asked questions in here to give you an idea of what your risk profile is. So this is Anthony Parent for Parent and Parent LLP. You can visit me at irsmedic.com. I want to thank you for joining me today.